5. All yours.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining this Roxborough Roundtable on the day following Earth Day 2021. I'm Keean Silvestri, and as part of my senior advocacy class, I'm becoming more involved in climate justice and sustainability. Thank you all again for joining me. This event will be followed by a Henry Avenue cleanup at 1 o'clock, and you can meet me at the Ram statue. There will be a sign-up sheet in my Instagram bio. But moving on to the information, I just have a few questions about sustainability. Why is the topic of sustainability and climate justice so important? Clean environment is essential for healthy living, yet too many institutions neglect the environment and some even deny climate justice. What would you say to these people?
Wake up.
Yeah.
How
Open your
about
eyes
that?
to the science.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the science part is, we're kind of done with that battle. I mean, the science is pretty simple. I've literally explained it to third graders in the class. It's not that hard to understand if you are trying to understand the world. If you're intentionally trying not to understand it, it's easy to confuse yourself and others. But we're kind of past debating the science. Even most of the whatever right-wing conservative corporate types are can no longer with a straight face or any credibility deny that it's happening and that humans are causing it. Now it's more, the debate has shifted to, what can we do about it? What makes sense economically? What can our society, our economy bear in terms of dealing with it? And what are the ultimate costs of it? So the debate has kind of shifted to that, I think, in terms of any people with any credibility or any access to the levers of power in our society. So I feel like we're there. And then, then there's more room for debate. You can have principled disagreements about, cost benefit analysis of dealing with climate change or sustainability questions. But I think there's also still a lot of bad faith arguments even on those topics. So that's my quick take on it.
For sure.
Yeah, apparently the same folks that sow doubt about cigarettes and cancer are the same folks sowing doubt about climate change and carbon emissions, and the pattern is all too familiar.
Yeah, some of the same scientists even. Yeah,
it speaks to some of the ways that we're wired. We're not wired, and this is not an excuse. We are not wired to think globally. We are not wired to think long term. It's just not part of our evolution yet as a species, although I think it's starting to happen. And it may have happened, we may have lost it from indigenous cultures. And so I feel like a lot of people can't engage at a bigger scale over a longer time span without specialized training or something that shakes them up, like say a climate disaster in their backyard that is short-term and immediate. And so I feel like, Tom, we're having societal struggles wrestling with this very imposing threat. And until it's real for people and people die next to you or somebody dies, not worth taking the action. Don't want to compromise my profitability.
And I think it goes even further. It's become, instead of a scientific issue, it's become a cultural, political issue where science is being ignored. And when Tom, you say among serious people, it's not being debated, but unfortunately, there's too many non-serious people.
They're quite serious.
Right.
They're quite serious about blocking any realistic action or significant action on it. So I feel like I had something else that I interrupted you for. I'm sorry. I'll let you continue.
I mean, according to some studies, the planet's average surface temperature has risen about 2.12 degrees. Some people would say that really isn't that much. But you, as more of an expert, could probably explain the effects around the world of a simple 2-degree difference.
Is that Celsius or Fahrenheit? Because it kind of matters.
At 1.18 degrees Celsius.
Right. So it doesn't sound like that much, does it? It sounds like just a small rise in temperature. But some of you have kids or had a fever. You get a couple degree fever, you're sick, and you get a 4 to 5 degree fever, you're in the hospital. And so the planet, like a person, has a fever and is sick and will get sicker, and eventually the planet will be in the hospital. Sorry to use metaphors so freely, but a couple degrees matters. When you make it your kid, it starts to matter a lot.
Right.
And you also have to think of the scale of this warming. If you would, if you imagine the size of the entire planet and its entire atmosphere, and the amount of energy it would take to warm that by, 1 degree Celsius, 2 degrees Celsius, it's cumulatively a tremendous amount of warming and heat energy. So this is at the scale of the planet. It's not my backyard is 2 degrees warmer. It's the the atmosphere of the entire planet is warmer.
And it's uneven. So some of the highs are getting higher and the lows are getting lower. And in general, things are less predictable. And so people in some localities might be suffering like a hugely greater amount than some in others. And I think that that's why justice plays such an important role in how like philosophy and ethics, which is my specialty, like really creates space for imagining, well, what are some other possibilities and how do we kind of overcome some of these psychological hardwiring kind of disincentives to be able to think about the long term or to be able to think about people who aren't in our community. I mean, even in Philadelphia, I'm in Mount Airy, and it can sometimes be like 5 degrees cooler than on Temple's campus in North Philly. And why should I be paying less for air conditioning my home in the summer when I already live in a more privileged neighborhood than someone who will then have to use even more money to heat their house in North Philly because it's just a few degrees warmer? It makes a lot of difference in the long run. And it's challenging to kind of think about, okay, how do we reframe this? How do we like get people to buy into that this is like a huge issue? Maybe you can put it in terms of how it affects them, but you can also hopefully appeal to their sense of justice and fairness and equality as well.
And just to build off that, I hear people saying, wow, this is beautiful weather. I'm so glad right now that it's so hot out. I welcome climate change, but like you said, it's going to affect different people disproportionately. And a lot of the focus is economic. I feel like that is a big deterrent for people getting involved in climate change. But do you think technology could be adapted, or there could be more of a focus? Because we do live in a society that builds on innovation and development.
As Professor Flemming is deeply thinking, that's a problem, Kim, because we tend to think, oh, we'll solve it.
Yeah.
Somehow, even COVID, thank God, we came up with a very quick vaccine. We think, okay, we got a problem, but we got such great computers, we'll fix it. And I think that we have to figure out that maybe there are some things that cannot be fixed. And that could be, I don't think we want to embrace that thought.
And to some extent, we have all the technologies we conceivably need to address the problem. It's a question of political willpower to apply them. And I think it's a good parallel to what Professor Lane was just saying about COVID. We got the vaccine, now we can't convince people to take the vaccine because of their political viewpoints. And I think I remember why I interrupted you earlier, Evan. You're talking about people, it was becoming a political identity. Now it's part of your personality to deny climate change or to act like you don't want to do anything about climate change. That's how you signal that you're a conservative or Republican, just as we signal that we're Democrats or liberals or progressives by taking climate change seriously. So it's part of our personality and our identities as much as an objective understanding of physics and chemistry and the atmosphere.
I'm very torn on this because on the one hand, we have we need for systemic and fundamental change. But to say to do nothing, to not use every possible technology to address every possible aspect of people's lives would be also irresponsible. So I think it's a both and. I think to only work with technology would be to deny the fact that we have significant and fundamental changes that have to be made. To not use technology and to say, well, we'll wait, we'll just start a whole new system, and meanwhile people suffer. That doesn't seem very equitable to me or ethical as well. So I feel like we have a responsibility to hit it on all levels at all time spans.
Yeah, I think a lot about like carbon sequestration And the ethical conversation around that particular piece of technology is a really interesting one, because will we need to like really intensely research and likely deploy carbon sequestration and technologies that like there are risks to, at least some of them. Will we need to employ them? Yeah, probably, almost definitely. But if the main entity funding and in control of that research and technology is fossil fuel companies, there's a lot of incentive for them to really be heavily pointing towards that work, so folks don't look at their continued destruction. So that to me is a really interesting place where you want to like talk about kind of this larger system and the technologies that we need to use to mitigate to the best of our abilities the like impending climate crisis that we're in. So yeah, I mean, that to me is like a perfect example of like how these two conversations come together in like who owns the technology, who's paying for the technology, like what's the defined like interest of the technology. Those are all questions that that we need answers to.
Yeah, it's definitely hard to break down who should be doing what. Like how involved should the government be? How involved should the private sector be? And how individuals or should just live their life to be inevitably more sustainable in the long run. In terms of Jefferson University, they have some ways of being sustainable. And I just maybe thought people could reflect and say, if you think that's like a good idea, or if there'd be anything that you would want to add. For example, it's one of the first hospitals in the region to implement a comprehensive waste disposal program.
I don't think we can hear you, Keean.
Keean, you're off mic. Go closer to the mic.
Okay. It's one of the first hospitals in the region to implement a comprehensive pharmaceutical waste system. They have 35% of the electricity will be supplemented from wind farms. 901 Walnut Street is a LEED Silver energy efficient building. I hope somebody might be able to explain a little bit more about what LEED Silver is. And practicing a balanced menu change to incorporate meals of 20% from the local area. What are your thoughts? What could they be doing more or even less? Like, is there anything that people say is great for the environment that just really isn't?
I think I'll just say one thing since someone else is speaking up. If you look at what the United Nations, climate, I'm forgetting the UN, the United States climate, or the UN climate panel, they're saying that we need to reduce to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees centigrade, which we think is, or Celsius, which we think is kind of safe. It's worse than we have now, and it'll progressively get worse even if we stop at 1.5. It'll take a while for us to feel all the consequences of that heating. To do that, we need to cut emissions by 50% by 2030. So that's 9 years now. We need to have zero emissions by 2050. We need to be in negative emissions for the rest of the century. We actually have to be taking CO2 out of the atmosphere to meet that target. So one way we can measure, is Jefferson doing enough? Are we on the right path? Are we on a path to cut our emissions as an organization by 50% in the next 9 years? Do we have a plan to have zero emissions by 2050? Do we have a plan to be carbon negative in the second half of the 21st century? So that would be one way for a quick rule of thumb to see if we're where we need to be doing our part. Not even to be going beyond, but just do our part.
I think, and I think silver is a precious metal that requires a lot of environmental destruction to achieve. So I'm being sarcastic. LEED silver, for those of you who don't know, LEED is a rating system that architects and clients use to measure their amount of sustainability. LEED Silver is a remarkably achievable metric to do. And so I would say that we would be happy to see more than that, and increasingly more destructive metals like gold and platinum. So platinum is the highest. And I think that, you know, how do we begin to bridge that gap to get to LEED Platinum? That's where we have to start thinking differently. And my worry is that we're nipping at the corners of energy. We're nipping at the corners of food. And as long as we keep nipping at corners, the main problem still exists. We need transformative and systemic change at a very high level. And that requires a catharsis, an academic and intellectual catharsis, and a reimagining of the purpose of a university and the purpose of a hospital. I invite all of you to join in on one of these so-called cathartic moments. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it should happen soon. I think Sean's doing her final presentation in May 5th. Maybe that'll be the moment. Who knows? But I think that's the frustration, Keean, is that we're just not seeing the all-out blitz. There's no sense of urgency or emergency in the actions that we take. Do I welcome every action? Absolutely. Do I want to support local farms? Yes. But ultimately, I'm in my 24th year of sustainability. We have gotten nowhere in 24 years. And if we keep at this pace, we will continue to be nowhere. And then your generation of all you young, smart folks will really have to deal with the leftovers and the impacts of what we left for you. And I feel like I ethically can't condone that. So I'm going to do another 24 years of sustainability because I think that's my responsibility. Sorry, that sounded like a soapbox, so I apologize for that.
I think sometimes, like, when people are forced, because it requires such incredible change, sometimes people aren't good at making the choice themselves. And so, like, when things like the pandemic came around, I, who tend to be a fairly pessimistic person, was like, oh, now people will, you know, be forced to slow down, be forced to like do X, Y, and Z. And on some smaller scale things, there's great local action. So like there were a lot of anarchic responses to the pandemic where there would be local aid communities set up. And I mean, we've still got some running in our neighborhood of like just weekly food sharing and weekly resource sharing. So like when you look at the hyper local level, there's some really wonderful things going on that I think have in some ways come out of these like external restrictions that things like pandemics have kind of put on our society. But I'm very disappointed in how little has been done too. I had hoped that, like, you know, there would be more institutional change. And instead it's like, oh, look, we can all like move to Zoom really quickly, which like Zoom is a great tool moving forward for like lowering commute times, lowering like, you know, emissions. But if we just see it as this like, well, we'll only use it when we're like forced to, or exactly, Sean, like with the accessibility, there are some people who like have been thriving in Zoom, right? But yeah, I'm not sure how much of that will go away when people aren't forced to do it anymore.
I'm going to ask you specifically, Sean, speaking of like a movement towards achieving climate goals, would you be able to speak a little bit on the Green New Deal?
Yeah, you betcha.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume everyone in this room like roughly knows what the Green New Deal is, but just to do a quick one sentence, essentially it is in the most literal sense a House resolution that was introduced in 2018 by AOC and Ed Markey that basically outlines over 14 pages how to completely overhaul our like infrastructural systems and what really important considerations must be made in said overhauls, and basically thinks through the energy transition, the infrastructure transition, the technology transition, and you know who and how that work will get done. There's a jobs guarantee as a part of it as well. Good union jobs is like one of the main kind of slogans of the Green New Deal. But in a more broader sense, the Green New Deal is this idea that the only way that we will be able to address the climate emergency is a massive, massive amount of funding and programming around mobilizing, like we're talking wartime-esque mobilizing of people and resources on a federal level to do all of the transitions necessary to reach really what we need to, the economic transformation that like needs to happen. And this general idea of this really thinking through environmental justice, jobs, thinking about unions, thinking about technology, and that entire kind of pipeline of work, that idea more broadly has reached municipalities, cities, states. There are countries in Europe that are forming Green New Deal type ideas. There's a citywide studio around the Green New Deal, because it really is this larger idea of like, if we take the way that we fund the military in this country, if we were to use that paradigm of funding and angle it towards transforming our economy so that it is centered around climate justice and social justice, what could we accomplish? So I wanted to kind of give that background of like smaller, like what is it actually, and then like what is it on this broader kind of idea level. And then really excitingly in the past week, there were the Green New Deal itself was reintroduced in the House. Bernie Sanders and AOC introduced Green New Deal for public housing, and Cori Bush and AOC introduced Green New Deal for cities, tribal lands, and municipalities, which again are these more like detailed granular bills that all stem from this larger idea of this like massive mobilization. So yeah, that was a big answer to a simple question, but that's the Green New Deal. And I'm a part of the Sunrise Movement, both at Jefferson and in the Philly Hub, which is a youth-led climate justice movement that is fighting for a Green New Deal.
And Sean, we have the money. People kept saying, we don't have the money, we don't have the money. We have an army budget that is 7 times the next 6 countries combined. So we
try 25. It's larger than the next 25 countries. So
we have a military industrial complex budget. We have plenty of money to solve this. It's
and if you added up,
we're already paying it.
All of the police budgets in the country, it would be the 3rd largest military spending in the world. It's US military, China, US police.
So the money's there, Sean.
And we have the Pentagon has a vested interest in combating climate change to some extent, because even in the most conservative parts of government, which tend to be the Pentagon, it's hard to keep control over everything, or try to keep control over everything, if you don't have a reliable climate. And so there's a lot of, it's very fearful. It is very, it is very disturbing, I think, especially being the daughter of a pacifist. It's very disturbing. But it's also kind of like, if you need to appeal to people's kind of like self-interest, there's no reason not to act. Like, I mean, everyone could have a pretty easy, like, self-interested motivation as to why we should act on climate change now. Even in the most conservative, militaristic, like, circles. Like, there's just no good reason not to do something.
Lane, your mic's off.
Yeah, what Kay says is very important, because always with any issue, it's a matter of framing. For example, pro-life, pro-abortion, how you pro-choice, how you frame something. And there's no question, UN came out and said that climate change is a national security threat. And I'm talking to the young people, if you approach your fellow citizens, not that it's some lefty agenda, because you know how they're going to shut off no matter what on that. Instead, if you approach it as a national security issue for the security of the United States, you may get a lot more traction that way by reforming the argument to benefit yourself. What have you thought of that, Sean, and Sunrise, and how to approach it that way?
Yeah, I really want that to be true. And I think the first 50 years of the environmental movement also really wanted that to be true. And unfortunately, I think that I am beyond in my own organizing and advocacy and career. Frankly, I'm beyond this trying to do things within the current confines of the way our world is set up. And I'm much more interested in paradigms. And I think that that's why I think we're seeing both from the Sunrise Movement as well as the DSA and some other really large national organizations, this connection of climate justice to employment and to jobs guarantees and to strong unions. We're seeing this connection of the Green New Deal and the PRO Act. We're seeing this connection in the Sunrise Movement of the Green New Deal and a jobs guarantee, where the paradigm that we want to shift is worker power, because it is in the interest of everyone that is largely represented by those who are working rather than those who are owning capital. It's in that larger group's interest to be thinking about climate justice and to be fighting for a more climate just world. And so I find typically that you can present this paradigm shift to most people and frame it in terms of like, do you want to have a good job that is guaranteed for a long time? Oh, and by the way, in your industry, there's always going to be work if we are implementing a Green New Deal. You're always going to be employed, whether it's like manual labor or, it's going to touch every industry. So I'm less interested in trying to go into a boardroom and convince people. I'm much more interested in creating really large systems powered by lots of like a mass movement of people to flip the way that the world works.
Sounds like revolution. You say flip, but I think you meant to say revolutionize. But you were careful there, weren't you?
Yeah, we definitely have
careful?
Yeah, really. I know what I'm thinking.
We definitely have to apply the pressures into the right places and institutions, colleges, the government, anywhere we can, really, because it is really a global issue that everybody can and should be getting involved in. So, like, what would you say the easiest way to get involved in? Clearly, joining Sunrise is like a very good step, and it'll introduce you to people who will help coordinate. But is there one simple step people can do like tomorrow that'll really, really help?
Yeah, take my course. I'm marketing my course. I'm actually about to head out. I would invite all of you, if you like having these discussions, I'll put it in the chat here. I know this is very self-serving and self-interested, but I would love to have all of you in the course, including you, Evan, and including Kate and everybody, just because we need to like hash all this stuff out. And if you're an undergrad and you're already paying tuition, what does it cost you? Just 3 hours a week, right? So anyway, I'm sorry, I was being very self-interested there, but I get that, Keean, I get that question all the time. Like, can you boil it down? And no, I can't boil it down. I'm sorry. I don't think I want to. However, I would say that you've got to find a methodology for thinking differently. As Sean said, how do you start to open yourself up to new paradigms? One could be taking my course. Another could be reading a book. But, again, I am just done with nipping at the edges. So Sean's convinced me that incremental change is not where it's at. And now we have to go much deeper and much harder. And choosing your scale. Do you want to choose the scale of your family and your house, your university, your neighborhood, your city, the globe? You got to pick a scale. I don't know if you can work at all scales at all times. So you might have to kind of target your ideas of where you want to hit. It could be just your year. I don't know what year, your sophomore, or it could be undergrads, right?
Rob, quick question before you leave. Should a sustainability course be required for all undergraduates?
I thought it was, Tom. Didn't we get that? Did we never get that to happen?
We do have environmentally focused courses in at least four of the Gen Ed categories.
But it's not required, and it's not required yet.
None of them are required. No.
So we're going to work on that, Tom, as per Sean's statement there.
Mm-hmm.
How about like maybe at the earlier levels, start introducing programs in middle school and high school to like encourage people?
Sure. Sure, everywhere, all the time. But
Yeah.
good luck with some of the local school boards getting sustainability on the curriculum right now.
Right.
Which is all the more reason, like Sean points to, for like this a huge overhaul. Like, I mean, I don't know. I think so. I come from Indiana. I live in a very politically divided family. And so my advice for anyone interested in getting involved more with sustainability would be to like first assess where you are. Like there are things that I can do because I have family that have different political beliefs. Like I can leverage that in a different way than what someone who doesn't have that type of community. I also definitely think after looking at climate change for so long, be a part of a community. Like it's really hard to feel the weight of it by yourself psychologically, but also just like emotionally. And so Sunrise is a great way to like connect with other people and make sure that it's not just you working alone. I think that that's one of the biggest temptations. Like you see how big the problem is. Our society oftentimes says like, you're an individual, you need to figure this out. Like this is your responsibility. But great authors like Naomi Klein have looked at this in depth and said, it's not your job to save the world. That doesn't mean that you do all or nothing. It means that you find a group to like have your actions be a part of it. And there's so many problems and there's so many smart people at Jefferson that, find where it fits best for you to be and kind of do what you can.
Yeah, I love to add on Kate's point on being part of a community. I think I like to think about finding your political home as something that everyone needs to think really hard about, especially as we are entering for the rest of a crisis is going to be frequent and more difficult for the rest of our lives, unfortunately. And I think that's just the reality of it. And the more that you can embed yourself in a community that has, first of all, structures of mutual care, but also like political structures as well, the better. And in Philly, we have such a robust constellation of political homes across every topic, across every identity, across like geographically. There are so many organizations to get involved in. And I've found that has been like one of the most rewarding commitments I've made in my life is really like embedding myself in local organizations. And whether it's, you get in a room and you're talking about how to influence the state legislature, or you're knocking doors for a candidate, there's so much like really local politics that you can get involved in tomorrow. You can go knock doors for Larry Krasner tomorrow if you wanted to. And that kind of work is so rewarding, and it actually works. Like we now have 3 really, really committed progressives in the state legislature because people went out and knocked doors and talked to their neighbors. And that type, like, I think it's almost shocking to me how influential you can be as an individual person when you get involved in local politics. I don't know if that's the case everywhere, but it's certainly the case in Philly.
Just to piggyback off of that, also, I'm sorry if it's loud. They like just started doing construction across the street. But we're lucky that it is so accessible to participate in groups like these. But back to your question, Keean, it's not like a simple step to like participate in climate justice. It's never going to be a simple thing. It's like you have to commit and show up for these organizations and actually like throw your time and your energy into this. And it's not easy, but I think that's like what makes it rewarding. So I think if Jefferson could like understand that and then like push that onto students, it would be a lot easier to have required sustainability courses and conversations, at least within every course, about sustainability.
And I think this is a good way to end. I feel the more involved everybody is, the better society will be as a whole. And if you can focus on your strengths into getting it into different aspects of organizations, I think it'll be able to reach more people, and the world will be a cleaner, more sustainable place. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for speaking and sharing your ideas. I hope to see you all at the Ram statue. See you then. Bye.